Here, as Ukraine declares a state of emergency, the country's foreign minister made a desperate appeal at the UN General Assembly, saying failure to act against Russian aggression would mark the end of the current world order. Vladimir Putin has said Moscow is still ready to look for diplomatic solutions, but that the interests of Russia and the security of its citizens were non-negotiable. Tomorrow's meeting between the US Secretary of State and Russia's foreign minister has been cancelled. Ukraine state websites have been targeted in what the government is calling a large-scale cyber attack. Among the websites affected were Ukraine's parliament and foreign ministry. And as the West introduces sanctions, the British government faces criticism for not going far enough with its action against Russian billionaires and banks. The opposition said they'd support tougher sanctions on Russia.
The head of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council calls on Parliament to approve a state of emergency over the crisis with Russia. China's foreign ministry says there is still hope for a peaceful solution to reduce growing tensions between Russia and Ukraine. A United Nations report warns that countries are not prepared to prevent and fight increasing wildfires that can harm health and property. And in the U.S., truck drivers plan to travel to Washington, D.C. to hold protests similar to ones in Canada against COVID-19 restrictions.
Russia has been hit with new sanctions by the United States and other countries after it moved closer to sending troops to breakaway regions in eastern Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin asked legislators for permission to deploy military forces beyond his country's borders. They granted his request unanimously. Putin has accused Ukrainian forces of violating a ceasefire. The Minsk agreements were meant to end fighting in the separatist regions. But Putin says the deal no longer exists.
As long as there's an ongoing conflict, by this decision, we're making it clear that, if necessary, we intend to stand by our obligations.
Still, Putin says it's impossible to predict the military's possible actions. Pro-Russian separatists control the regions of Donetsk and Luhansk. Putin has recognized them as independent, and he signed friendship treaties that would allow Russia to build military bases there. Ukraine fears Putin is creating a pretext for war. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken says he's canceled plans to meet Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Switzerland. The White House says a possible summit between their leaders is certainly not in the plans at the moment.
Now that we see the invasion is beginning and Russia has made clear its wholesale rejection of diplomacy, it does not make sense to go forward with that meeting at this time.
Blinken has said he would meet Lavrov on Thursday only if Russia did not invade Ukraine. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki also told reporters the United States is never going to completely close the door to diplomacy, but demanded de-escalation, which she defined as moving troops before a summit can take place. And U.S. President Joe Biden says Russia is carving out a big chunk of Ukraine, noting this is the beginning of an invasion. So he's added to penalties he'd already ordered.
So today, I'm announcing the first tranche of sanctions to impose costs on Russia in response to their actions yesterday. These have been closely coordinated with our allies and partners, and will continue to escalate sanctions if Russia escalates.
U.S. officials will cut off Western financing to two financial institutions, a development corporation, and the military bank. They'll ban Russia from trading its new debt on U.S. and European markets, and they'll target Russian elites and their families. Biden had already signed an executive order banning economic transactions with the breakaway regions. The ban includes new investments by Americans in Donetsk and Luhansk. It prohibits the trade of goods, services, and technology, and stops financial transactions such as loans and guarantees. Biden says Russia will pay an even steeper price if it continues its aggression. Japan's prime minister has announced his nation will impose 3 sanctions on Russia.
The first measure is a suspension of the issuance of visas to people with ties to the two regions whose independence has been recognized by Russia, and a freezing of their assets. The second is a ban on imports and exports with the two regions. The third is a ban on the new issuance and distribution of sovereign bonds by the Russian government in Japan.
Kishida also says if the situation worsens in the future, Japan will swiftly take further measures in cooperation with the international community, including the G7. And leaders of the European Union have brought in their own sanctions on Russian lawmakers and financial institutions. EU foreign ministers held an emergency meeting in Paris. The sanctions are expected to include a ban on travel to the EU and the freezing of assets in the bloc. The EU will restrict access to its financial markets by the Russian government. Economic transactions between the EU and the breakaway regions will also be restricted. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced sanctions targeting 5 Russian banks and 3 individuals with close ties to President Putin. He said any assets held by those individuals in Britain will be frozen and they'll be banned from traveling to Britain. German Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced his country will suspend the process of certifying the Nord Stream 2 natural gas pipeline from Russia. Now, European nations are speeding up efforts to reduce their reliance on natural gas from Russia as tensions rise over Ukraine. Vessels carrying liquefied natural gas have increased since mid-December in the Dutch port of Rotterdam. About 60 LNG tankers have entered EU's largest port in the past 2 months. That's half of the total for last year. EU members purchase about 40% of their natural gas supply from Russia. But they've moved to procure supplies from the United States, Qatar, and other nations, as Russia could reduce supplies to Europe in response to the Western sanctions over the Ukraine conflict. Europe is increasingly turning to renewable energy sources. The region is also pushing up demand and prices for natural gas, which is cleaner than coal or oil. Ukraine tensions have put additional pressure on European nations to diversify their natural gas sources. Members of the U.S. women's national soccer team and the sports governing body have agreed to resolve a dispute over the pay gap with men. The players and the U.S. Soccer Federation on Tuesday issued a joint statement. It said, contingent on the negotiation of a new collective bargaining agreement, we will have resolved our long-standing dispute over equal pay and proudly stand together in a shared commitment to advancing equality in soccer. About 3 years ago, 28 players on the women's squad sued the federation, demanding equal pay with the men's team. U.S. media say the body will pay $24 million to settle the dispute. Star player Megan Rapinoe commented on the news.
I'm just so proud, to be honest. I'm so proud of, all the hard work that all of us did to get us here.
She added, we can move forward in making soccer the best sport that we possibly can in this country. In other news, a Japanese man and his Taiwanese partner are appealing to expand the legality of same-sex marriage in their homelands. Japanese national Ariyoshi Eizaburo and Liu In-ren of Taiwan held an online news conference with supporters on Wednesday after their attempt to register their marriage in Taiwan was rejected twice. Same-sex marriage is legal in Taiwan unless one partner is from a country where such unions are not recognized. Such marriage is not legal in Japan, so 42-year-old Ariyoshi cannot obtain some benefits of marrying his 34-year-old partner in Taiwan, such as holding a spouse visa. Ariyoshi said Japan should also allow same-sex marriage. Lawyers for the couple said there are more than 400 international same-sex couples in Taiwan.
Marriage is one of the basic human rights, but do we not even enjoy it? We hope couples who love each other would be able to marry, regardless of gender, age, ethnicity, or distance.
The couple has filed a lawsuit at the Taipei High Administrative Court in a bid to have their marriage registration accepted. The hearing is scheduled to begin in April. The development could pave the way for more international couples in Taiwan's LGBTQ community to wed. And those were the headlines we're following.